not on air. We're not on air. We got music, but not on air. Restart. Off air. Woo! Welcome to the Meeple Syrup Show. I'm Daryl Andrews, and we're here with a few designers and friends discussing design. This is episode 42, and we are on air, so I'm excited. I don't know why mine says off air, but we are on air because it's showing on YouTube. So we've already got our one glitch figured out. Let's see what other ones come along our way. But before we go any farther, I got to introduce a friend of the show. She's been on before. Nicole, we're excited that you're here. Why don't you say hi to everyone and tell us what games you've been playing lately?
Hey, everybody. Recently, a friend of ours brought back a copy of Deep Sea Adventure from Japan. So that has been hitting the table basically constantly. I'm super glad that that was on the way because BGG sold out like instantly.
Why?
It's so good. And a lot of cacao has been hitting the table as well. That's
I love that game.
Yeah, it's been a really good one. Yeah, so that's for me. Nice.
How about you, Sam? What have you been up to?
I've been up to trying to click on my picture there. I've been up to again, playing with the boys, but a lot of prototype work just in preparation for Protospiel coming up in next week. At the end of next week, I'll be around Ann Arbor. It's not quite in Ann Arbor, but Jesse, Scott, and myself are going to meet up with Ed, Brian from Toy Vault in Ann Arbor, and all the other people that are there for Protospiel to play some games. So I've been working on Crossed Blades, Mythos, which is that storytelling game, Cthulhu storytelling game, which I just found out is not alike, but that there's a couple other Cthulhu storytelling games that I probably should have had my eye on while I was designing this one. Vault of Cthulhu, I think, or Cthulhu's Vault. Cthulhu's Vault is, yeah. And then Burning Rubber, which is one that Scott Veenvliet and I are working on, which is pretty cool. So I'm hoping that one we get really well done so that I can show it at Gen Con because I have really high hopes for that one. How about you, Daryl? What have you been playing?
I mean, I've been boring like you, and I wish I could say that I was playing all these awesome, cool, published games, but I haven't. I've been working on prototypes, which I hope will be awesome published games someday, but not yet. So, like you said, with Protospiel coming up, I'm not going to Protospiel unless last minute I sneak into your trunk and don't tell Tanya and then ask for forgiveness afterwards. But more likely it'll be Gen Con, which is still coming up pretty quick as well. So,
4 weeks away.
Yeah, so that's nerve-wracking and exciting all at the same time. Also, I gotta give a shout out to one of our regular viewers, Odd. I just want to say congrats for getting healthy. He had surgery last week, and we're just glad you're home safe and sound, and keep making awesome games. He sent me a whole bunch of really cool. Everyone should know Odd because his art really stands out. He has a very distinct style. So I just want to, he's a regular viewer of our show. Here's even his business cards. They're awesome.
Oh, those are cool.
Yeah, it's Odd Hack Welder, Hacko game.
Odd Hack Welder, and he makes great Hacko games. He also participates in tons of tournaments, and he also has a game out with CSE Games, and so I just wanted to give a shout out to Odd because he is one of our regular viewers, and we're really happy that you're healthy, and hopefully we can have you on the show soon. So.
Oh, hey, before we go on, one thing that I did play while I was waiting for Ethan to finish something theatrical. Where did it go? Oh, it's in the other room. But I played the game that one of our viewers who sponsored us to get their game reviewed, not reviewed, but talked about and discussed and have a debrief with us their game, and it's a zombie game, and it is a solo to 4-player game, and
The
so
Road to Ruin.
that's right, Road to Ruin, and oh, there it is, right there. Hey,
Ooh,
let's
I
take a
just
picture.
got it. I haven't opened mine yet, but I am
Oh,
super psyched. It looks so cool.
yeah, yeah.
So I
And I
wanted to
played
mention that
it
as well. So you read
solo,
my mind.
and it's interesting. So what we're gonna have to, well, you can play it, and then we'll discuss it, and we'll
Yeah, let
bring
me play
them
it this
along.
week,
Yeah,
and then I look forward to chatting with Justin, the
yeah,
designer.
cool. All right, well, let's bring on our guests, actually.
Woohoo!
So we're gonna bring Phil. Hey, there's Phil DuBarry and Chris Kirkman from Dice Hate Me into the fold, as it were.
All right.
So go ahead, Daryl.
Well,
Start us off.
yeah, I'll get us started. Actually, we'll probably bounce around on topics and questions and games. I'm gonna go maybe a little old school with Philip because the first game that I discovered of yours was Kingdom of Solomon, and so I just want to start there because I'm curious because it was a game that I enjoyed and I was really intrigued by. Hey, there he goes, Chris Kirkman showing the love. Mine's too far to grab it, but. I'm curious, what was the inspiration there and, what was the design process and how did you find the right publisher for it? I realize that's a whole bunch of questions. Why don't you start us off with something easy?
Well, I guess that was, like you said, kind of back towards more of the beginning of when I was kind of getting into board games and I was still kind of playing through some of the classics, and I had just gotten through Kalis. And I guess that might have been the first worker placement game I ever played, and I thought, well, this is fantastic, and of course, and it was a little too complicated, but it was, I could tell that it was a really neat idea, and I thought, well, I could make one of these. And so I set out to do that, and I made this like really, really boring kind of a bunch of blobs on a map, and they're, it was like the most basic thing you could think of, which is actually the way I design games. And so then I figured out, well, I need some kind of theme to pull this thing together, and I thought, well, I have, as a children's pastor, I have kind of some interest in biblical themes, and I thought, well, I could probably give that a shot. And I didn't want to make one of the bad Bible teaching kind of a game. It was just kind of to use the historical kind of theme, and so I hadn't seen that done before, so I thought that would be kind of cool. And I guess that was probably the year after Revolution came out, so I went to Origins and kind of shopped around that game and a couple other games to different people, and nobody really was interested in this one. But then after the show, James Matha sent me an email saying, hey, you were going to show me that game. What is it? And I said, well, it's, I explained it to him. He said, well, send me a copy. So I did, and he was real excited about it, and we worked on it for another year or so, which is what my other experience before that was Revolution, and Steve Jackson Games was kind of like, okay, well, this is, I gave them my game, and they're like, okay, here's the finished product, and that's pretty much, I didn't really get to do much of the development or whatever, but it was a completely different experience with Minion games. I was there like every day. We're emailing back and forth and making little tweaks, and it was just a good education in how a game actually gets developed after the point of designing it.
Excellent. Well, we'll definitely dive into the kind of the differences there, and it's interesting you mentioned James because we will actually have James on the show next week, so we'll even get to follow that up a bit, his development style. But I know Nicole's got a question for Chris, another person who has lots of experience with development. Nicole, go ahead.
Hey, I'm just wondering, are you working on not only your own designs all at the same time as you're trying to develop other stuff, or do you just tend to focus more on development and when you get a break, try and pour everything into design?
Yeah, primarily, especially, well, I mean, ever since I started Dice Hate Me Games, I've been pretty much the development portion of all that. I between finding TC and Daryl and finding their designs and helping them to develop that into a final finished product is kind of where my specialty lies. I do game design as well, but my focus is more on taking a an idea or a first or second pass game, and then helping to craft that into something that we know is going to be good as a product, but also as a game. So, and especially now that we merged, Dice Haven Games and Graded Games merged, my official title is Development Director. So that is exactly what I do. I scout, I look for new games. I'm going to help that designer, work with that designer, like what Philip was talking about, going back and forth with the designer after they do play testing, checking those things out, and then getting it all ready for the market. That's primarily what I do. I love game design as well, and I have 2 or 3 of them kind of in various stages of the process. But in order to really take care of the bottom line of the company, I have to focus more on development.
Excellent. Good questions. Phil, for you, one of the things that I've followed is, well, just the growth of your family and all that kind of stuff on social media. Congratulations on having yet another child.
Thank you.
One child in particular that I'm quite interested in is your daughter who designed a game. And from the second that you put that up on Kickstarter, I was like, yes, I need to support that because I believe in that. How did you foster the sense of design in your own children?
Well, I appreciate your support. That was one of those squeakers. We were watching down to the line to see if that was going to happen or not. But Isabel made tiger stripes back when she was 8, and at that point, being the older kid, the oldest kid, she kind of goes in and gets exposed to things first, and so. She kind of was on the journey with me, exploring a lot of these different games, and she really picked them up quickly and enjoys them, and so that's something we kind of share. And so she comes to me one day with all these little hand-drawn tigers and these little scraps of paper, and she says, "I've made a game." And this is, now this thing sort of happens to me, fairly frequently with some of my kids. They're all the time bringing me little scraps of paper and stuff. But this one, it really caught my attention because it was the first time it ever happened. And she started explaining it to me. I thought, well, that's actually pretty clever. That's pretty good. And so I made her up some little, a little bit of art to go with it, and kind of dressed it up a little bit. And we made maybe like 1 or 2 little tweaks, and that was pretty much it. And she actually, once we figured out, we had kind of a product that was all finished up. She actually sprung for the first print run. We made like 50 of them, I think, and she sold through them and made a little bit of a profit. And
Wow.
And then later on, it got picked up by Game Salute, and so that's actually going to be out pretty soon.
Yeah.
And she's pretty excited about it. It's been a long time. She thinks she feels like forever for her. It's like 1/3 of her life that it's taken to do it. But,
I'm totally waiting just to click on received on my
right,
Kickstarter.
right. But the art turned out really well, and
Yeah,
I
that's great.
don't know. I'm excited about it. It's really cool. It's something cool that she can tell people, and I don't know if we'll see any more games by her or not, but she's definitely still a gamer, and she'll actually be with me at Gen Con, so if you want to meet her.
Oh,
I would
awesome.
love to meet her, and if I have the game, I'd love her to sign it.
Oh,
If it's
there
up
you
by
go.
then, right?
That sounds great.
Yeah.
All right, well, I mean, I got to give another plug for a future episode coming up, July 22nd. We're hopefully going to be focused on kids' games and kids' design and stuff like that. So very excited about that. Probably a little too late to be able to get Leo on our show, but we'll maybe ask her some questions at Gen Con and maybe be able to get that online. I got to jump back to
That'd
Chris.
be great, yeah. Let's do that at Gen Con, sorry, yeah.
Yeah. So I got a couple audience questions for Chris. We got one, so I'm going to hit you with both of them. One's from a friend of our show, Bearded Meeple, and he's curious, what's with the animal ratings on the card games? And then question number 2 from David Tome. He's wondering, Dice hate me. Why do they publish games that use dice? Why? So why don't you knock both of those off for us, Chris?
It's pretty funny because both of those questions are probably some of the most common ones that I get at cons or when people kind of meet up with. As far as the animals are concerned, when you're talking about the card games, those are rabbits. So our games are divided into categories based on animals in the Chinese zodiac. So the rabbits are the smallest size. They're the 54 card games that come in the small boxes. Then we have the monkey-sized boxes, which are the Bottom of the Ninth, Carnival, Grey Holland Company size, below the ball. The next size up is a rooster, which is like compounded or Viva Java dice. Then we have a tiger, which is like Viva Java, the original Viva Java, and Brewcrafters.
Mm-hmm.
And then our largest size is a dragon, and that was what we were going to. Our first dragon was going to be Monster Truck Mayhem. It still will be eventually, hopefully, whenever we relaunch that campaign. But they're all kind of categorized by box size so that they're all consistent, but they also kind of relate to the depth of the play generally. Now, Isle of Trains, like for War of the Rabbits for the 54 card, is a little bit heavier, probably more of a monkey, depth of play style. But mostly they're related, so we have a consistent box size, and people know kind of what to expect from those. It also gives us a way to categorize and number them all. So when they say ratings, if it's a Rabbit 7, that means it's 7th in the Rabbit line of games that we have.
Very cool.
That's the animals. Why do I publish dice games if dice hate me? It's because the saying goes that I love dice, they just hate me. So I like playing games with dice, even though it's torture sometimes because it's just ridiculous. I'm the kind of guy who always brings 5 times the amount of men when playing Risk or Axis and Allies because I know I'm going to have to roll 5 times worse than everybody else. But we love dice games and people love them. So, just because they hate me doesn't mean I don't want to publish games with them in it.
All valid points. Philip, I was just thinking about. I was just thinking about theme and how you were talking about a theme for the first game you were working on. Is there a theme that you haven't worked with yet?
Is there a theme that I haven't worked with before?
Yeah.
That you'd probably like to. I think we're losing Nicole a bit. So wonders of the internet. So I'm just going to put that question out there for Nicole as she drinks something. I think she's asking you, are there themes that you would like to work on that you haven't explored yet?
Oh, okay.
And if that wasn't the question, that is now.
yeah, there you go. I don't know. I'm always kind of surprised to see what kind of themes kind of pop up because I just sort of wait and see what's gonna happen. I mean, every once in a while I'll sit down and say, okay, I'm going to make a space game, or I'm going to make this game, but I don't know. I guess probably because I'm more of a mechanics versus theme kind of guy. I guess I'm more interested in coming at the interesting gameplay part, and then finding a theme that sort of fits kind of well, and then going back and tinkering with the mechanics to make it fit really well. That's kind of how I go about it. But I'm sure there's plenty of themes that would be fantastic to explore, and maybe even some that aren't zombies and whatever else. But maybe some that are. I don't know.
Chris, let's talk to you about theme and mechanics and things like that as well. When you get a game that is brought to you, what makes you say yes? What makes you say no? And what do you think the percentage of submissions to yeses are for you at Dice Hate Me?
Well, that's interesting because in the past, before the merger with Greater Than Games, a lot of games would get probably turned down quite a bit, simply because Dice Hate Me has a certain aesthetic. I like to start with theme first and know that the game was generally built with the theme in mind. That's not to say that I haven't found some games that are mechanically superior that we kind of developed into something that would fit the Dice Hate Me aesthetic. But now that we have a larger audience with Dice Hate Me and Greater Games together, I can develop and look at themes that are not necessarily the Dice Hate Me aesthetic. They might be something that's appropriate that we develop and put the characters of Sentinels of the Multiverse into, or that's for our Sentinel Comics imprint. We also have a third imprint now called Fabled Nexus, which is sort of our sci-fi and fantasy realm of games. So I'm much more free now to look at other games that incorporate more wide base of theme, and also I can play around in that universe and take a game and say, like, this really feels like it needs to be a Dice Hate Me game, or it needs to be in a Fabled Nexus stable, which is kind of cool. So we'll have to see, within the next year or so. I mean, I'll be at Gen Con. I'm going to be looking at some submissions and things while I'm there. We're getting submissions. We have submission guidelines at greaterthegames.com. And we have the Dexterity Design Challenge that's coming up, the deadline for it on August 31st. So there's going to be a wider variety of games that we can draw from and that I can draw from and take a look at. So I can't say that we're going to be shotgun signing a whole bunch of people. That's very, very selective. Want to remain pretty selective to pick the best, but I have a wider variety that I can choose from now.
I actually jumped back to Philip. As we're talking theme and as such, I was naturally interested. I was a youth pastor for many years, and again, Kingdom of Solomon. The reason I stumbled into it was kind of the theme that you had chose. And I'm curious with a theme like that and themes that you have worked on. You mentioned it was harder to shop around Kingdom of Solomon. Do you think it was the theme that was part of that, or did you, from your experience, did a theme like that, did you think that helped sales, or do you think that was tougher, or what do you feel like when it comes to having like a Christian theme or a biblical theme in a game? Did you see any kind of trends or anything that you saw?
I think it can cut either way. I think one of the reasons I had trouble at the beginning was just it wasn't a finished game. It wasn't quite good enough, and people could see that. And I guess James gets some credit for maybe seeing past that a little bit, because we did a ton of work. It's a much better game than what James saw at the beginning. So I guess that was just kind of a blind leap into it. I think during the Kickstarter we saw that. I think we had some people that were very interested in it being biblical, and we had some people that were very turned off by that and weren't sure if it was going to be a game or is this going to be some kind of Bible lesson or what is this thing. And so, but I think you're as long as you can convince people that you're actually you have a game here, then I don't think it's going to hurt you too badly. But it's just one of those things. There's always these themes that kind of catch people the wrong way sometimes, and people just have their own kind of aesthetic, or some part of a game will, like maybe there's slaves in it or something, or maybe there's some other part that's objectionable to some people, and that just shuts them down on it, or it's the 87th zombie game that they play and they're just not interested in that, or whatever it is. That's just the way things go. But I don't think there's anything terribly specific about it that would hinder you.
No, that's great. That's great. I think, Nicole, you have a viewer's question for Chris? Oh, she's on mute. Oh, there we
go. There she is.
Hi. Me? Tony Miller would like to know what sort of games are you looking for the Fabled Nexus line? Are you looking for sort of large or small games, heavy games, anything beyond sort of sci-fi, which you mentioned was kind of the theme of that line?
Yeah, it's wide open, really. Anything, if you think about what the Dice Hate Me aesthetic is, it's the retro Americana. You can look at it and tell that it's a Dice Hate Me title. Fabled Nexus is going to be a little bit more of our traditional wide open board game space to play around in. Sci-fi and fantasy, definitely. I'm a big sci-fi fan. We also have a couple of games that are horror based that will probably happen in the Fabled Nexus universe, are being worked on right now. So we have Galactic Strike Force, which is already an existing product that was with Greater Than Games Sentinel Comics line, but now we can move it over. And we do other publishings or printings of it. It'll be branded as a Fabled Nexus title. So it's that kind of universe that you can play around in, sort of the sci-fi and fantasy realm. So anything that doesn't really, look like bottom of the ninth, probably. It's pretty wide open. That's not to say that I won't be looking for other Dice Hate Me Games titles, because those are a definite. It has a definite feel and look to it. But Fabled Nexus, as far as if you got submissions and things, I can always tweak theme, especially if you're not 100%, married to it, and we can work it into a Fabled Nexus title.
Good to know. Good to know. We have lots of stuff. In fact, we'd like to set up a meeting with you at some point, Chris, at Gen Con. Is anybody here other than me going to Protospiel in next week? No.
I might sneak in your trunk.
Oh yeah, we already had that discussion.
And I wish I could go. I keep wanting to go every single year, and every single year I can't do it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, another question from Tony Miller. Tony's asking Phil. Philip, have you looked at the commissioned Kickstarter? And do you expect to see more game with Christian themes based on the success of that? Have
I
you seen
actually
it?
have not. I'm not sure what that is. Does anybody know what I can?
No, but we can look it up.
Yeah, yeah, it's actually a pretty successful Kickstarter right now, so it's doing well, and like Tony said, I mean its theme is around a biblical theme, so.
I do want to shout out to Tony though. He's a friend of mine, and he went with me to Lexicon in Lexington. That was a couple of months ago or something. No, we had a pretty good time doing that.
Awesome. Well, while Sen's taking a look at Kickstarter, I'm gonna actually use this as a excuse to jump back over to Chris with a question about theme. We're talking about themes and some that carry some controversy, and what also I know you have to deal with PR and interacting with people and messaging and all that. I'm curious if you'd be willing to talk about New Bedford a bit, because that was an opportunity but also a challenge, I'm sure. Maybe talk through kind of the whaling topic and how does a game handle something historical but also might be interpreted in a controversial way.
Well, I think the best way for us was just to simply not skirt the issue, was to be honest that this is a historical game. It's based in reality, but not make it excessive. It actually, a lot of even some of the gameplay toward the end speaks to the depopulation of whales because of the whaling industry. So we look at it and we went at it with a educational viewpoint of it, and I think that board games can do this without people having to shy away from something that's a little bit might be considered sensitive. We try to do it in a reverent manner and in a way that it could be, again, historical, because this is a very, very important time in American history, and the game itself is a lot of fun. It doesn't glorify anything at all. So we're going to relaunch that in about 3 weeks on Kickstarter. We've got a lot of new art. We're going to address the whaling issue a little bit differently and talk about that in the Kickstarter. And just make sure people know that this is history. So
Awesome.
it was tough. I will say though, I mean, when you talk about the PR portion of when we originally did New Bedford, I had to answer a lot of questions, and you have to defend your stance about it. But when it comes down to what we wanted to do with that particular game and how it would fit into the Dice Hate Me Games lineup with a retro Americana or with even American history, it was a perfect fit, and I think it's a great game. It deserves to be made.
Yeah, I'm actually really looking forward to seeing it at Gen Con. I was hoping to see it at Origins. I just missed out, but I'm very excited about checking it out at Gen Con. So
we'll have demos set up at the booth. We have large kind of demo room set aside for Greater Than Games, Dice Hate Me Games stuff, and so just come on by. We'll show it to anybody who wants to see it.
Excellent. Nicole, I know you got a question for Phil?
I do indeed. You have worked with Steve Jackson games before, in particular for Revolution. I'm just wondering what that was like.
Well, Revolution was my really the first good game that I ever made. I made lots of games growing up and didn't really think much about it. Didn't have any ideas of being published or anything like that. And then as I got more into the modern board gaming hobby, I started going to conventions, and still I thought, well, there's no way I'm gonna get a game published or whatever. But then I made this game Revolution, and my friends actually liked it. My family would actually request to play it, which is just absolutely crazy. So I thought, well, something special is going on here. So I ended up making copies of it by hand. So I made like 30 copies of it or 50 copies of it, something like that. And I'm painting little cubes, and I'm doing all kinds of this crazy stuff. And selling them on the internet, and just absolutely losing my shirt on it. But it's fun because I just loved it, and I thought it was a good game. And lo and behold, Phil Reed from Steve Jackson Games bought one of them, and I had no idea who he was or anything. I think he even bought it under like his other company's name or something. And so anyway, he calls me up one day and says, "Well, we'd like to make your game." And you know, I had heard of Steve Jackson Games, but I'm not like a big Munchkin fan or anything. And I just sort of knew that they were a game company, and so I said, all right, that sounds great. And so from there, you know, they did come back and forth a little bit with some of the things, and I did have to do a little, as much arm twisting as I could to get one of those rules that got changed. At least there's like the kind of variant rule in the back that preserves the getting your stuff back if you lose, kind of a thing. But I mean, it was pretty easy for me. I just kind of sat back, and then they said, well, here's what your game looks like, and I did get to come out to some conventions and demo it and stuff, and that was kind of cool. And but it was a good introduction and everything, and definitely a great experience. The guys there are top notch. They're very professional, and I've witnessed this now that I've been able to work with lots of other publishers. Steve Jackson Games, they know their stuff, and they do a great job. They're absolutely professional, and it was great to work with them, and great to maybe work with them again sometime on, you know, other stuff.
Right. Revolution was actually the first game that I think I kind of quasi met you through as well, Phil. We had communicated over social media for some odd reason, and I can't even remember why, but that was way, way, way back in the day. Before we actually, and we still haven't met face to face, but through the magic of the internet, we get to do this kind of thing.
Right.
We're moving on to Chris. Let's get some question from the audience. So, okay, so Dave Tomaz, actually, which is the way you pronounce it, apparently.
I butchered it like every other
we all butcher it. Dave always answers to whatever we call him, so it's pretty funny. But it's Tomaz. Apparently, it's Portuguese.
Portuguese and Polish.
And Polish, yes. So for Chris, what do you find is the hardest part of being a publisher and developer?
Well, the publishing part, the hardest part about publishing is Kickstarter. At least in the modern industry. I mean, managing logistics, figuring out price quotes, going through the whole process, doing art direction, graphic design, all that's, you know, a lot of stuff to juggle. But to be honest with you, the 800-pound gorilla is Kickstarter.
Really?
Yeah. I mean,
Why?
What's that?
Why?
Just because you have to be on your A game at all times. You've got to answer. You got to wear 18 different hats. You've got to answer questions constantly. You've got to keep the enthusiasm up. You got to sit there and worry: are we going to get X amount of dollars, or are we going to get Y amount of dollars? And every little choice that you make during those campaigns, having run 13 of them now, it's like, you know, you see every single campaign, you see something a little bit different, and you also see the evolution of the atmosphere on Kickstarter, which is something that we addressed on the last State of Games podcast. We talked in Geek All Stars. We talked a little bit about how Kickstarter has evolved from way back in the day to the way it is now, and how Kickstarter backers have a different mentality. A lot of them do. So it's hard because you have to evolve, and you have to stay on top of things. Not only that, but as a publisher, you have to stay on top of industry trends, things that games that may not fully exist right now that you want to get out onto the market and have a unique presence. So there's a lot of little things that go along with that, trying to make sure that from concept to completion to Kickstarter to market, all those things are balanced just right. I know that was a long, complicated kind of answer, but publishing it's not easy. It's not for everybody because you have to absolutely do everything.
Mm-hmm.
You have to be on top of everything.
Absolutely. Well, kind of to continue the conversation with Kickstarter, I know Philip has had a few games through Kickstarter, one being Skyway Robbery, which did well. I recall it doing about 30,000 or so.
Mm-hmm.
I can't remember exact numbers. But you know, that was a great success. I'm curious if you could tell us a little bit about your experience from the designer side of having games going through Kickstarter. You know, were you nervous about it? Were you totally against the idea? You know, how did you feel going into it and coming through a successful Kickstarter?
Well, yeah, it sort of depends the game from game. The very first one I had on Kickstarter was Kingdom of Solomon. That was back in 2011, which is like the very beginning of Kickstarter, and so that was a very different experience. I think we went like $10,000, which was 200% of our goal, and we were just ecstatic about that. And then more recently, we've done Skyway Robbery, like you said. I did Family Vacation before that, and that failed on Kickstarter. We did not fund,
That's
and yet
right.
the publisher
Yeah.
decided to just do it anyway. Not terribly successful, but that's the way it goes. But yeah, Skyway Robbery. I was I think I did about every podcast you can do during that
Right.
time, right before then, because I was worried to death. Because I really, really, really wanted to see Skyway Robbery. I mean, all the art that went
Yeah.
into it, all the work that went into it. It's
Oh,
just
it's
an amazing
absolutely
game.
gorgeous.
It's
Yeah.
the game that I want to play, and one that I'm almost, I don't know if I'm the most proud of it, but it is by far right up there with some of my top work. And so to watch that, look like it's not going to succeed almost every day, I get up and I think, oh, it's not going to make it, it's not going to make it. And then even right up to the last day and the last 5 hours and the last 2 hours, the thing funded in the last 10 minutes. And
Wow.
it was just a race to the finish, and I
That's
can't thank
unreal.
all the backers enough for that. And so that's one experience, and then the other one is like a
I
game
was
like
gonna say, what about Spirit of the Rice Paddy? I mean,
well, and
that
then
thing
Spirits
took
of the
off.
Rice Paddy is the other side of the coin, right? It's like
You almost had 2,000 backers.
right,
That's
we
incredible.
that funded in what, like 2 days or something, and you just kind of sit back and watch the show, and it's not a big deal at all. Same thing with Fidelitas. I mean,
Yes.
that was the easiest campaign ever, I think. Well, I take that back. Actually, Battle Cruisers was the easiest one because I I did nothing at all and didn't even have to worry about it, and you just kind of watch it happen, and that's it. Those are the ones you like, but boy, when it's not working, it's just like every part of your being is trying to make those numbers go up and thinking, what can I do to get these people onto this, and it's very stressful. So I don't know. You've been both ways, and I guess it just sort of depends on the mood at the time and the game, and things are never quite like what you thought it was going to be, and I don't know. It's just it's interesting.
I do not know how people can handle doing Kickstarters. It seems very stressful to me. We've got another viewer question, and I'm wondering, Chris, maybe if you could speak to this one. Tony Miller wants to know if you think that Kickstarters are failing due to a lack of enthusiasm. So much out there, like a glut of good projects, and I would also wonder if there's a little bit of brand recognition in there, that it's easier for some maybe to succeed just because of the name.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about kind of what's going on with Kickstarter right now. It's just a different atmosphere than it used to be. One of the things is, of course, we have just more projects just out in general. More people have discovered Kickstarter. We've got a lot of different ones. As far as goes with name recognition, I do believe it's probably slightly harder sometimes for newer people who have a first-time project on Kickstarter to really get any traction. But sometimes that doesn't really matter, especially if they're involved with the community or they have their name somewhere else. Name recognition doesn't necessarily equate to funding a project either, because like with us, we have a good reputation and a lot of really solid backers and supporters in Monster Truck Mayhem just didn't do well. And so I think that it's a mix of all those things being mentioned. Kickstarter, right now, there are a lot of projects on Kickstarter, so money is spread a little bit further along than it used to be. The other thing is lack of enthusiasm. I don't know that there's necessarily a lack of enthusiasm, more so than it's a lack of wanting to commit to that altruistic part that Kickstarter was based on. 4 years ago, people saw that you had a dream. They're like, yeah, I want to be on this, and some people still believe in that, but now you get a lot of questions or a lot of comments like, well, I'll just wait for it to come to retail. And the problem with that, and what we try to tell people, is that some of these other projects that fail their funding and then just go ahead and publish it and put it to retail, that actually hurts a lot of people who need that money on Kickstarter. And that's us. I mean, we still, we're a larger company now, especially merged with Greater Than Games, and we can publish, do reprints. But as far as new games are concerned, we really rely on the support of our backers to bring those games to fruition in the market, and especially also test kind of the marketability and viability of a game. So there's a lot of different factors. I think a lot has been some people on Kickstarter who have not used it accordingly to the way it was originally built, and also it's changed public perception as to what a Kickstarter game really is now. So they either want a good deal, a huge deal, or a big lag between the time they get it and put it in retail, which is fine. Those all make sense. But you have a lot of those where they just assume that if it doesn't fund, it's just going to go to retail and they'll be able to pick it up later. And I think that's harmful.
Cool. Philip, this is a question for you from the audience. Lucas Hedgren, asks you, you spoke of a rule in Revolution that you had to fight for in order to keep it the way you initially designed it. How far has this gone in other published games? How much do you cling to existing rules that you feel are sacred cows? And how many do you let go when the publisher says, hey, let's change this?
Well, it sort of depends. It depends on who the publisher is, and it depends on the situation and how big of a deal it's going to be. Of course, I guess with Revolution and the fact that I had so little input into any decisions like that, I guess I got kind of hooked into. I really felt it was really important, and I tried to be as forceful as I could. And I feel like that was a good compromise to just kind of put it in the back of the rules as an option, and some people play it like that. So that's one compromise you can make. But then other times, you just have to, if the publisher just maybe they do know better. Maybe you do need to let go of some of your stuff, or consider some other possibilities for some things. We had a lot of back and forth on Spirits of the Rice Paddy. Because Ape Games has a couple of guys that they are like alpha gamers, and they played Spirits of the Rice Paddy more than I've ever played it, for sure. And so they're coming back with me like, well, here's what we need to do, this and this and this, and I would come back and say, okay, well, I agree with 4 of those things, but I don't like the 5th one. And they're coming back saying, no, we want the 5th one too. I'm like, well, okay, well, what about this one? And we went back and forth on this for a long time. They convinced me of some things, and I got some things kept in there. And, it's just kind of a process. You just have to kind of keep a good attitude about it. Don't let it turn into some kind of big poison thing where everybody hates each other at the end of it. Realize that everybody's got the same goal. They want a game that's the best game possible. And you just try to work together and use information when you have it. Use sometimes, like I know when Jason and I were making Fidelitas, every once in a while we would come to loggerheads about something, and we would say, well, let's let the playtester decide. And so 2 or 3 playtesters would chime in on which way they felt it should go, and that's what we did. And so sometimes that's the way you got to do it. So you just have to try to keep a good working relationship.
Very interesting. Well, let's flip the question on its head and bounce it to the developer in this discussion. So, Chris, have you ever worked with anyone where the designer just would not budge on a change, or it was very difficult? What was that like?
Oh yeah, Daryl and TC, they don't budge at all.
I was just gonna say louder and petty.
Louder and petty, they're just divas. They don't want to change anything. Now, I've been pretty lucky so far in that if I've had a suggestion or we need to make a little rules tweak here or there, most of the designers that I've worked with have been very generous in at least wanting to try it out or think about the change. For the most part, it's been a very organic process. I mean, like I said, I work really well with Daryl Louder and TC Petty III on their designs. It's just been very easy to go back and forth with them to make small suggestions and tweaks, and they do a ton of play testing, individual play testing, and we do looking at that as well. So far, no problematic designers. I'm going to knock on wood about that because as we expand and start working with more we'll kind of see more of that, and you have to just kind of. But I'll be honest with you, one of the reasons, I mean, not only does the game have to be good, and I have to like the theme, or at least the wrapping of a possible theme with the mechanics, but I also have to like the designer. I don't want to sign and work with someone. You have to work very, very closely with someone, and it's a relationship. And if you're not going to get along with that person, then you've got a long 1.5, 2 years worth of development and production, and then afterwards you've got to try to promote it. And it's like dating somebody. I mean, you got to really make sure that you guys get along. So that helps too. So be nice. That's what I'm going to say. Be nice and be flexible as a designer, and it'll go a long way in publishing.
Excellent. Hey, so this is a really good spot. This is Daryl had just sent me a text in our little chat thing to remind people this is a really important thing. And Jay and I will be talking about this at Gen Con in a little bit of our how to pitch to a publisher workshop. And it's exactly what Chris just said. When we sell a game, when we pitch a game, we are not just pitching a game. We are actually selling ourselves as people who really, really are in it for the long term, as people who are good and easy to work with, not necessarily going to bend to everything that a publisher wants, 100%, but people who will engage, people who will work past the signing over of the intellectual property, will be on social media, all that stuff. So be not only just a good person, but be an active person in the production of your product as much as the publisher will let you. And I think exactly like Chris said when he said he's looking for a designer he can work with, as a designer, if you care about your game, you should look for publishers who you want to work with, not just because of their brand recognition, not just because of their past product line, but because you genuinely like the person you're going to work with, because it can be a 1 to 2 year slog, if not, as people have found out before. Anyway, on to Philip. So Philip, let's talk about designing for Kickstarter specifically, because that's where a lot of the games are going. How has your design process changed in order to make room for stretch goals and things like that?
Well, you have kind of this awareness of this big thing and how it all works, and of course it's great if you have like all this extra content and stuff, but it really is a little bit crazy sometimes. I mean, you can drive yourself crazy thinking about all that and trying to come at it backwards like that. And you're seeing even now a little bit of backlash, I think, from some publishers just saying, look, this is we're not making a bunch of extra stuff. This is what it is. This is the game we want to make. And I mean, I don't know that stretch goals are gone or anything. I guess they're probably still there. We didn't do any for Skyway Robbery, and I mean, maybe that's one of the reasons it was kind of a slog. I know you didn't do any for your Monster Mayhem, and I don't know if there's a nice honesty about that, but I don't know if that's viable or not. But whatever. But even with the stretch goals, I feel like maybe it's not as enticing as it used to be. All the people, I guess, expect it. But I really do hate sort of designing like that. Although really, even before Kickstarter, people were designing for, well, and then the expansion is going to have this, and then this is, so you're still designing for expansions and things for a lot of games. But some games just don't have expansions, and that's okay. And I think you just have to make the game you're going to make, and if it's one of those that has some room for extra stuff, that's fine. There's some games that you weren't smart enough to put the extra stuff in at the beginning, but a year or two later you think, hey, I bet I could do this. And maybe by that time that's a good place for it. Maybe the market's ready for another expansion for your thing. So, it can work. I think maybe just don't try to force it. Maybe that's what we're getting to here.
Absolutely. I'm gonna kind of change gears a little bit here, Chris. I'm curious. For Dice Hate Me, obviously you've built up some relationships, and so when those designers have things, they're very quick. It's very easy for them to show you those games. But for other designers, especially, we have a bunch of viewers that maybe they're working on kind of that first, as Philip said, first fun game, or they've worked on games before, but now they've got something that they're really proud of. What is a good way for them to get that game in front of you? Is that, should people be sending it to you? Should they be attending Gen Cons, Protospiels, things like that? And then how, is it speed publishing events? Is it making a scheduled event? All that kind of stuff. So maybe give kind of the Cole's Notes version of how do people pitch games to you.
Sure. Before it was always just, hey, either behind the scenes talking, or you find me at a con and say, hey, you've got a second to listen to this pitch for a game. We have an official submission guidelines package that you can take a look at greaterthangames.com. So if you want to submit that, then we have guidelines for several stages of submissions where it's going to be like a sell sheet and a summary of the game, and then if we like that idea, then I can get in touch with that person and get an actual prototype of that, or a print and play, or whatever it takes. That's the long route around. Now, if we're coming to something like Gen Con, you know that I'm going to be there. I'm going to be helping out in the booth quite often, but we have a lot of volunteers, so I'm going to be able to schedule times to sit down. I know, Daryl, you've already contacted me about getting some time scheduled. And I'd like to sit with you both and try to figure some things out. So, contact me on Twitter or say, hey, if you got a second to look at this. The most important thing for me, however, at a big con is it's fine if you've got your game with you, but you've absolutely got to practice your elevator pitch, because I have probably more free time than some of the other publishers, simply because my job is to scout, and so I'm going to go out and be talking to people and seeing what people are playing and what might be around in the prototype areas. But you absolutely need to listen to some podcasts that talk about it. We've talked about how to pitch games. There's a lot of things, a lot of information out there, but get it down, distill it down to that 3-minute elevator pitch that is really rock solid. Practice it in the mirror. Practice it on your friends. Say, what can I do to craft this? That will get a publisher the idea of your game, and then you can bring them in, and if they have time beyond that, then you can sit down. So you see me at Gen Con, you say, have a second, I look like I'm running with my head's on fire or anything like that, but and you say, hey, I've got an idea for a game, and here's my pitch, and if you have a sell sheet, sure, take a sell sheet, get a card, and then we can sit down, either schedule a time at Gen Con or talk about it afterwards. That's usually the best way, especially, I think, for me, but it works pretty well for everybody else in the industry as well.
I've
Dear
heard
Chris Kirkman. I'm typing out my letter right now. Chris.
I've heard that sell sheets are a very good way to get a quick pitch to somebody. So it's an interesting kind of craft. Speaking of Gen Con, Philip, you mentioned that you were going to be going. I'm just wondering if you are going to have any newer games there for sale or for demo.
Well, I know that we're going to run several demos of Skyway Robbery in the Game Salute demo area, and I'll be there only Friday, but I think I have 3 or 4 slots for that. I'd like to get over to Ape Games and do some demos of Spirits of the Rice Paddy. That may happen a little bit, but I'm sure they'll be demoing that. And of course, I have several prototypes that I'm going to somehow squeeze in and try to show some people here and there, and maybe even get some feedback and things like that. But it's going to be a busy day.
Oh, excellent. Chris, let's chat a bit about what's going on in terms of a relaunch. How does a relaunch work? You talked about what's going to happen with New Bedford, and you'll relaunch Monster Truck Mayhem at some point. How does that work?
Well, it's an interesting beast because, honestly, luckily, New Bedford and Monster Truck Mayhem are really the only projects out of the 13 that we've had to relaunch. New Bedford probably would have funded, but I kind of covered the reasons why we had to pull the plug out, well, mostly taxes. But the relaunch, really, we took a step back and thought about some of the feedback that the backers had. Some of them wanted a little bit different approach with the art. They liked the overall feel of the game, but they felt like most people wanted to have more of a traditional kind of isometric view or illustrative view of the building, so the town sort of looked a little bit differently when you put it together. So we've done that. We've taken a step back. We've hired an illustrator to do the buildings. The tiles will be structured a little bit different. The wailing board will be structured differently. We're doing a different take with the cover. So we're trying to just listen to the feedback for what the backers had to say with the original one, and then rework the campaign in just such a way that we can have breaking it up a little bit more, some more planned stretch goals with advanced art, so we can tease to people, let people know what's coming up if we can reach certain funding levels. Taking a much more traditional approach as far as like breaking the game apart enough so that we can have an inexpensive tier and a lower funding goal that then we can add more into the game as we get further along in the funding process. So the relaunch is basically, you have to just take a look back and see what didn't work. And in terms of New Bedford, the timing of the year definitely didn't work. It was a horrible time. So we wanted to make sure that we were maximizing the demo time at Gen Con. So we're going to run the campaign, of course, across Gen Con enough time before and after for people to acclimate and get kind of in that and get the game out in front of people. When it comes to something like Monster Truck Mayhem, we're taking a step back, looking at different production quotes. Again, a way that we can possibly break the game out into multiple pieces to lower the price point a little bit. And we tried going the break the mold route with this one and didn't do funding. I mean, didn't do stretch goals. We had one pledge tier, one specific set pledge funding goal, and we said, like, we get all that, you get all this stuff. It just didn't work. And so you try these things sometimes, but the Kickstarter market doesn't really cater to that very well. They feel like it's a pre-order at that point, and it's definitely not. So when you relaunch, you just have to go back in and see what didn't work, what can we do differently, and then just hope for the best. And we think it'll do. I think New Bedford will do fine this time around. At least I hope. I'm not going to jinx this, but we've got a lot of exciting things for people, especially for previous backers, but new backers for New Bedford. It's going to be really exciting.
Absolutely. Well, Philip, I got to ask this because I am a big fan of the designs of yours that I have discovered, and I'm looking forward to demoing and checking out the ones that will be at Gen Con. But I'm curious, what else is on the cooker? Any games you can hint at that you're tweaking on, working on, or even looking to shop?
Sure, yeah. Okay, well, the next game that it's actually already signed, and it's going to be going into more careful development and hitting Kickstarter sometime next year, is called Hitler Must Die. And it is just kind of a gritty, sort of realistic co-op game about assassinating Adolf Hitler. And I'm very interested in the subject matter. I love World War II. I've read a lot of books about that, and so I've made this co-op game about it. And I just want to invoke that feel of the Gestapo just kind of being right on your tail the whole time, and waiting for some things to line up the right way, and just being kind of frustrated when Hitler walks out of the room at the wrong time, and you got to get all these things, and people are kind of chickening out here and there. And so some of the discussions that you have during the game are similar, I hope, to the ones that they actually had. All these ideas about, well, who's going to be there with him, and what are our chances here? And it all comes down to this big dice roll at the end. Chris, you'll love this. You just roll all these dice, and if you get him, or if you don't, then all kinds of bad stuff happens to you. You might survive, but it's bad news. So that's what I'm hoping for. So I'm excited about that.
Any others you can tell us about?
The other one, I do have this kind of fantasy sort of game called Dwarves of Darkspring that has had significant playtesting, and it is just about ready. And I have some people I'm going to show that to, and other people I may show it to, and maybe or play it or whatever. So if you'd like to see that, you can let me know, and just some other stuff. But so anyway, that's kind of like a cross between Hearthstone and Agricola, if you could imagine a game kind of like that.
Interesting. All right.
I could potentially.
My mind is just blown a little bit by that. So a last question for you, Chris, just to wrap up. What kind of design tip would you give to a newer designer for their work, either from a designer or developer's perspective?
From their perspective, don't be married to anything. Be flexible. Don't necessarily think you've got the perfect answer for something the first time around. It takes time. It takes playtesting. Listen to other people who play your game. Don't just, especially if you put a game in front of people and you've got to learn to separate kind of what's the good feedback from the bad feedback, but just definitely listen listen to it all, then take it back, process it, sort through what's going to be good and what's going to be bad for you and for your game. But do not dismiss anything outright until you let it sit and you think about it. That would be my biggest recommendation, especially for people who really want to get that playtest in and make the best game they possibly can. A lot of people get defensive because it's their baby. And, yep, I mean, I understand. But you got to be able to craft the best, kid out there, with developing and designing a board game. From a publishing perspective, I would simply use what I said before. Practice your elevator pitch. Make sure you know your game inside and out. You can answer questions about things. Do a lot of research even on the manufacturing side. You don't have to do that with every publisher, but sometimes it might help so you can help say, like, hey, or if you're familiar with, like, for instance, Dice Hate Me Games, you could go, hey, it can fit in a monkey box, and I'm like, hey, great, sell point, These things happen. So.
Chris, I'm waiting for you to make a rat box.
Funny you should mention that. We're actually joking around because we might have to go a size bigger than a dragon, and we would just jokingly call it the rat.
I would love that. Why is my voice sounding twice? That's really weird. Well, anyway, okay. To Philip, last question for you. What is one piece of advice that you would give to a novice designer trying to break into the biz?
Okay. Well, I would think I got a couple of different ones. Well, I'm doing it too great. Okay. First would be play a lot of games. Second would be design as many games as we can. And I think the biggest advice would be go to a lot of conventions and meet some people and get on Twitter and meet all the different people on Twitter and get to know some of these people, get to know some publishers. Come to Origins where you can actually go up and talk to people. You can at Gen Con, but go to some of the mid-sized ones maybe, and really just try to connect with other designers and publishers, and that'll help you get to know the business a little bit, and it'll give you some open doors for you to walk through maybe.
Great advice there. All right, well, on that echo note, we probably will call it a night. We thank everyone. Philip and Chris, thank you so much for being on the show. We're going to do an after show, and I'm pretty sure Chris will stick around. I don't know if Philip will be able to stay up.
I can.
Awesome. That's fantastic. And we'll talk more on a variety of subjects during the after show. We're a little more chaotic than the after show. But one thing that I didn't get to ask, and we'll talk more about, is the dexterity challenge that Dice Hate Me's got going on. Talk a little bit about that and a variety of things that are going on in the game scene. Again, thanks so much to our sponsors for making the show possible, our guests, and ultimately the viewers, because really we wouldn't have a show without you. So thank you so much. Keep making great games. Look forward to playing them someday soon. Woo, Jake made it.